Welcome to Movies Are Life. I'm your host, Nathan Chandler. Although I'm not sick, in honor of today's film, I'm dressed in pajamas, sitting in a bed, and ready to indulge into the fairy tale that is The Princess Bride. I'm welcoming in Michael Andrus, and just in case you are wondering, he is joining me virtually and not sitting by my bedside. But how are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing great, Nathan. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for joining me. Last time you were on the podcast back in October, we discussed the film Michael Clayton, and that was a lot of fun revisiting that film because at that time that was only the second time I had seen it. There's quite a few years between the two viewings, and so I can honestly tell you that with this with this film, I've seen it many times. I couldn't even fathom a number just based on my childhood alone, but it's been a while since I've watched it, so it was really fun to go down memory lane with this one. So The Princess Bride comes in at number 19 on the Ringers list of the 50 best rom-coms. We will dig into this one a bit, but I don't know about you, but I had never thought of The Princess Bride as a romantic comedy. I think my brain's always thought of it as a 80s film or a family film. But before we dive into the fire swamp, a little background on this film. The Princess Bride is a 1987 American fantasy adventure comedy film directed and co-produced by Rob Reiner and starring Cary Elwes, Robin Wright, Mandy Patinkin, Chris Sarandon, Wallace Shawn, Andre the Giant, and Christopher Guest. Adapted by William Goldman from his 1973 novel of the same name, it tells the story of a swashbuckling farmhand named Wesley, accompanied by companions befriended along the way, who must rescue his true love, Princess Buttercup, from the odious Prince Humperdinck. The film preserves the novel's metafictional narrative style by presenting the story as a book being read by a grandfather to his sick grandson. The film was first released in the United States on September 25th, 1987, and was well received by critics at the time. After only having modest success at the box office at first, it has over time become a cult film and has been considered as one of the best films of the 1980s. Michael, you quickly volunteered to just have a discussion about this film. So I'm assuming you kind of liked it. What's your personal history with this film?
Like you, this movie I just associate with my childhood because of how many times we watched it. It was my sister's probably favorite movie growing up. And so we would just play it on VHS over and over and over and over again. And so when you sent out the list, and it was like, that just was a natural selection for me. It was like, I could talk about this movie for so long. There's so many different details to it. And it was just fun to rewatch it this week and revisit so many things from my childhood, but also now as a parent watching it and looking at it from the grandfather's perspective, it just kind of had like a different weight to it. And at the end, like I teared up, which I never did as a kid. Tears were not something I associated with this. And there's also just so much more humor that I think you miss as a child that rewatching it as an adult just makes it so much more fantastic.
Yeah, it's so funny that you said that. One, I almost had the complete same experience as you did this time around. It's pretty bad if we're starting to relate to the grandfather one.
Yeah.
But two,
I mean, I did watch it on VHS, so that feels a little bit.
But two, the last scene, man, you hit it. I was going to kind of save it to the end, but you brought it up. But same for me, like. The power of his last line, that you hear throughout the whole film, as you wish. I mean, it really hit me. Like it just was a perfect summation of, I thought that why, yeah, obviously I love storytelling, but just the impact that storytelling can do, make just an individual feel, but more importantly, and I'm probably thinking a little too deeply here, what I like about this podcast, it's like, how stories bring people together to talk about things. And, the weight of that moment, I was really shocked. I'm with you. I was like, oh, wow, that was unexpected. And so,
yeah, no, one of the things I noted on watching it is, at the beginning, the grandfather is like, well, my dad's dad read my dad this story, and then my dad read it to me, and now I'm reading it to you. And I think that's right in line with what you're saying of the power that story has from one generation to the next, that, just helps shape our own personal identities and the narratives that, we cling to for comfort or hope, or encouragement, that just link us with past generations, and that, we hope that on our best days we're passing on to our own kids.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the I think the power of the screenplay. Because all that said, this is not a movie that's hammering that message, into you.
Right.
It's very simple, but very very resonant for sure. So I know your kids are on the younger end. So have they seen this movie?
They have not seen it yet.
Yeah.
And rewatching it, I was like, well, why is that? Like, so my son is going to turn 7 here in a couple months. It's like, I'm pretty sure by the time I was 6 or 7, I'd seen this movie. But there were also moments, like most notably the fire swamp, where I was like, oh, I also was scared out of my mind, when the rodent of unusual size showed up. And then, like, we were all trained as kids to be so fearful of quicksand, and like she just, falls straight into, like, a deep pile of it. And so it's like, I don't know, maybe I should wait a little bit longer. What about you? Have your girls seen it?
So they had, and so that's what I was trying to kind of remember when, but it's been a while,
Yeah.
and so even when now Hayden probably hasn't, who's 6 right now, but Hallie I know certainly has, and because I had even brought it up to her that I was watching this, and she had a recollection of it, but I think if we watched it again, I think she'd be into it, and obviously when she first watched it, there's a lot of scenes that kind of went over her head. But I do remember when we watched it, I did kind of skip a couple scenes really fast, like even that one quick scene with the eels in the water and stuff like that. Because I remember that moment where the eel jumps out at Princess Buttercup. I remember that as a kid, like frightening me. But it's kind of like we grew up on these type of movies, right? Kind of like my joke is always that 80s PG is not the PG of today,
Oh, 100%.
and I mean maybe you are, but I'm not personally scarred for the from these moments and stuff. But
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm scarred. I would say that the screaming eel scene definitely has shaped my understanding of eels, period. Regardless of how many nature shows I've watched, I just assume that they're all like the eels, from this movie. And so that's, I don't know if that's a lasting legacy that I really want to, put out there, but I guess I have now. So
Yeah. So if this is something we'll, with the rankings at the end, we'll kind of actually analyze this a little bit more, but just kind of on the surface level, is this a movie that you ever thought as a romantic comedy?
no, and even rewatching it, I was kind of astounded at how easily it shifts from like buddy comedy
Hmm.
rather than romantic comedy, but then there's also like the revenge element to it. And I think I always thought of this movie more as like action revenge rather than romantic comedy.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But then, when you take a big focus on it, I mean, it's like, it's a very romantic film as far as the whole thing is about the pursuit of love. And then also, I mean, it is flat out just a hilarious movie. So it's kind of like, I'm like, oh, okay, I never thought about that. But Whitney, my wife, she jokingly said, yeah, of course it is. It's just that you're a guy, and that's not how you framed it as when you were a kid,
Fair,
and
fair.
yeah, that's fair. Because the things that I think about with this film, are the sword fights and the kind of some of the slapsticky type of humor, that's throughout this movie. I was wondering, I don't know about you. I've of course seen this movie many times, but rewatching it this time, it particularly hit me that, like, I don't think I'd seen the full film as many times as I've seen the first half of the film.
Uh,
I don't know about you. I think as a kid, for whatever reason, there's a certain like halfway point. I think when Wesley gets finally gets captured or whatever, that I didn't watch quite as much for whatever reason. I don't know if that was your experience at all.
I was kind of taken at how fast the first half of the movie goes.
Yeah.
Like, there's just no fat. It's just straight scene, 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 scene. And then, yeah, the movie does kind of slow down a little bit once he's captured. But I think I'm with you that my memories from this film are definitely the first half, because it's, the three trials he had that Wesley has with the sword fight, and then the wrestling, and then the wine scene, and then there's the forest, and then yeah, it's almost two different movies from that standpoint. So yeah, I think I've seen the whole film gazillions of times, but my memories are stuck really in the first half of it.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, for me, there's a lot to like about this movie, but in particular, the cast, I think, is just amazing and stellar. Maybe part of it is like we probably like a lot of these actors and the other things, but do you like the cast that's assembled here?
I love the cast. This was Fred Savage, and I didn't realize this until I just looked it up. But Fred Savage hadn't done the Wonder Years yet,
Oh,
which
okay.
just kind of blew my mind. And this, was Robin Wright's really breakout performance. I think she'd maybe been in one movie
Yeah.
before this. They have Billy Crystal doing the cameo when it's, you know, in that weird stretch in the 80s when SNL is kind of weird and falling
Mhm.
apart, but he's like the only thing holding it together, and then he pops up in this movie. Um, as a kid, obviously, that none of those things, you know, really resonated with me other than Fred Savage because of the Wonder Years. But this introduced me unknowingly to Mandy Patinkin
Mhm.
and Christopher Guest. Both actors that I've enjoyed their works. In the decades since, and so. And in a weird way, I think this probably ruined Chris Sarandon's career because he's just so unlikable in this movie. Like, I don't know that I saw him in anything else ever again, And
Yeah.
so, no, it's just an outstanding cast, and one of those things that does feel like a relic of the 80s and 90s, where they could just assemble like a group of relatively unknown people, and it just produces an absolute gem.
Yeah. It's funny you brought up Fred Savage, and I just wanted, in particular, I remember my aunt always saying this, but I have gotten the Fred Savage comparison all my life.
Oh, I can see that.
Yeah, and like as a kid, and even a little bit now. So anyway, I know he's kind of been in a little hot water, like in the news, kind of lately, and so maybe I should distance myself from that a little bit more. But anyway, I just that immediately, like him popping up on the screen. My aunt always used to talk about how she thought, and we're kind of roughly around the same age, so it always kind of tracked a little
Yeah,
bit.
I can see that. I also remember being insanely jealous of how cool his room was in the movie.
Yeah.
It's like, man, he has his own TV and video games, and his mom lets him keep Cheetos on the headboard, and just like, I can remember being like, what a cool room.
Yeah, that Cheetos bag always stuck out to me for whatever reason, just kind of the old school label, and but also, yeah, it's. I mean, my kids do this all the time. We have like chip clips and all that kind of stuff in the pantry, but if they go in for a bag of chips, there's no way that clip is going back onto that bag. It's just wide open,
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
but they scarf them down, so I never have to really actually worry about them
It never actually
going
gets stale.
stale.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think the cast is wonderful. It's funny. I don't think I saw. I remember when Homeland came on Showtime, and I started it, and I had never, like, when somebody told me that Mandy Patinkin was, from The Princess Bride, it like blew my mind because I hadn't seen
Right?
much of his stuff between those 2 points, and so and that him being on Homeland kind of started this kind of new wave of like stuff that he was in a couple movies, and we're a big fan of the show The Good Fight, and he plays a prominent role in one of the seasons. He's so good in it. But yeah, it's kind of fun to see his younger self. And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and I'm a especially I grew up watching wrestling, and so the Andre the Giant component of it, like, always was interesting. Even though to this day it's so hard to understand him in
Yeah,
this
there were
movie.
multiple scenes where I was just like, I have no clue what you just said. Like, okay, sure.
Yeah, that was always kind of like his hindrance, so to speak, a little bit. But like, particularly when he was in this movie, was like when his health wasn't the best. So
Right.
I don't think that helped things very
Did you
much.
see the Andre the Giant documentary that came
Yeah, it
out?
was wonderful. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
really good.
so many stories that they told in that kept coming to mind as I was watching, just as you pointed out, recalling like where he was in his career and like just his various appetites when he wasn't performing,
Yeah.
and how that impacted all of this. And so, having that, again, as an adult watching it and knowing some more of the context, just added a nice new layer to his performance into the film.
In this series, I kind of was thinking, sometimes there's a lot of things in movies that stand out, like as far as props or setting. Was there anything that like you remember? You kind of mentioned the eels. That was like something that definitely sticks out. I mean, the rodents of the unusual size as well. Is there any
Yeah,
other
that
kind of?
that stuck out. As an adult, just props to the wig wear that is happening in this film. Um, I mean, I'm assuming there's a lot of wigs going on in here, but that was pretty incredible. The six finger glove guy.
Yes.
So when we get the first shot of the six fingers in the glove, that definitely stuck with me. Um, like I mentioned before, that just the grandson's room, just has always stuck with me. Um, how cool the Dread Pirate Roberts outfit is,
Oh
just
yeah.
all black with the mask, and uh, just thinking back then, like I definitely had friends. I was never cool enough to do it, but I had friends who went as the Dread Pirate Roberts for Halloween. So yeah, those are things that definitely stuck out, both from childhood viewing and now.
Yeah, I like Christopher Guest in this role, but I also like there's just so many things in this movie that exist but don't ever really have an explanation. And the six finger
Yes,
glove being one, like we clearly, the six finger man, but like nobody ever talks about that enhanced his sword fighting abilities, or it just like it's almost plays as a another punchline where we get the one shot of it. But I just like how it exists, but it's almost
right,
like I think with a lot of like books, which obviously this movie is trying to evoke, your mind kind of fills in lots of gaps. And I think the screenplay does a good job of those sort of things, like the cliffs of insanity, like. And it really just lets that lie. You don't get a
right.
background of like why it's called that, but
Well,
that name alone evokes danger. And
well, one of the things that struck me in watching it this go round is how much real world stuff there is, but then how much really is just fantasy storytelling. And so, like, they make so many geographical references, like Spaniard and the original Dread
yeah,
Pirate Roberts living in Patagonia in retirement, and Fezzik being found in Greenland. And so it's like, but at the same time, there's also these two kingdoms, and one of them has giant rats and like a fire swamp, and that just kind of coexists in the same world as the real world. Or like, I never noticed this as a kid, but at the top of the cliffs of insanity is like this ruin, and it's like, how did that happen? Like that feels like the most defensible spot possible, and yet there's now these ruins. And so yeah, it's just funny that so many things, as I was watching, I wrote questions on like, wait, but why did they not explain this? And am I supposed to believe this is happening on like current Earth, or is this like a different version
mhm.
of Earth, or like what's happening here?
Yeah, and I can't wrestle with if whether or not this was just uh like, let's say if this movie was made today, a lot of the sets and everything, I don't know if it's just a sign of the times that it was made, where, I mean, it's very much a lot of the stuff it feels like a studio. It feels like set pieces, but I also think it plays into the imagination of this world that you like mentioned. And so I don't know how much of that is on purpose or because that's just how movies in the 80s had to be made. But I like there's something about I don't know. It's not altogether fake, but it kind of adds to that imagination aspect to it. Do you know what
Yeah,
I'm?
I think I don't I don't know that this movie would be better if they remade it now. Like I think some of the campiness that comes with a 1987 movie is what makes the movie as you were describing. Like now, I think about the eel scene or um the rodents of unusual size scene and just like, is that better with CGI or is it better because we have these puppets which just make it seem so fantastical and bizarre? And I, I'm glad this is one that the studios have not circled back to remake. And um, I don't know why that is, because they've remade so many other much beloved pieces of IP, from our childhoods. But I'm glad it's not been touched.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and even with the like torture device, it's just kind of, it's like they're not trying to. A lot of it is just they let the mind fill, like as I mentioned, fill in the gaps. Like water comes down a chute and something.
Yeah, like
There's just
what is actually happening there? Is it just
right.
like those few points of his body he's just experiencing high water pressure? Like is that
Yeah,
torture? What is? Yeah, I think
yeah,
it's best not knowing how some of the mechanics of this
yeah.
stuff work.
But as a kid, that's kind of part of the innocence. You don't think as adults we dive into that all like, wait, how would that work? All that, all the kid knows is that this device hurts and it sucks life out of
Right.
them. And so anyway, I mean, I like that because it does play. It's easy to become, even as an adult, to watch this movie as a child and kind of delight in those things, so to speak. But
Absolutely.
yeah. So I mean, I think this one, especially a lot of romantic comedies have amazing quotes, but I mean this one might be on the top of the list just from some of the quotes alone. But what's one of your favorites?
I mean, I wrote down so many as I was watching that are just such great lines. When they're talking about the Dread Pirate Roberts and Wesley being killed by him, and then the grandson says, "Murdered by pirates is good." Like, it's just it's hilarious, but it's just like a toss away line. Um, I love the line as Vizzini and Fezzik and Inyo are beginning to sail away, and Fezzik has just been in his rhyming mode, and Vizzini says, "No more rhymes now. I mean it." And then Fezzik goes, "Anybody want a peanut?" That one, that's one from my childhood that I always laughed at. That stuck with me. Vicini's line at the scene where they have the poison. You fell for one of the most classic blunders. The first is to never get involved in a land war in Asia, but only slightly less unknown is this: never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line. And then, of course, he cackles and then falls over
Yeah.
dead. There's a few that were more poignant that I think really do, support the case for this being a romantic comedy. Death cannot stop true love. What it can do is delay it for a while. When Wesley says, "We are men of action, lies do not become us." And then there's just the iconic ones, of course. Wov, Twoo Wov is a good one. But then I think my favorite for the line from this movie is, of course, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." That
Yes.
that just has to be the best quote of the movie.
Yeah, and I can't tell you growing up, just as kids and friends and whatever we were make believe thing we were doing, that line had to come up almost all the time. And then I just love it in the movie, just the comeback of just stop saying that,
Yeah.
So anyway,
I mean,
it's
but my pick, I guess, for favorite quote does support Whitney's case that we're guys, and so of course we didn't see this because I picked the one about revenge. But you know, "As You Wish" is pretty iconic.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's so simple, but it just plays into so much of this. Yeah, inconceivable, of course. And then you mentioned it, the priest at the wedding. But I have an uncle who I guarantee you, any wedding you go to, he would start with marriage, like every time. It's almost like a given.
Yeah.
But and then not the greatest quote ever, but we used to always mimic to when Princess Buttercup has the dream sequence, and that one lady in the crowd starts heckling her. But yeah, I think maybe I still do that without thinking sometimes. And when I don't like something, it's just boo. So yeah. What's one of your favorite scenes from this movie?
Gosh, there's a couple of them. It's hard to beat the Cliffs of Insanity and the duel between Wesley and Inyo. Just the respect they have. I didn't realize this, but there's so many like deep references to fencing techniques and styles that, like, as a kid, just completely went over my head. And I don't know anything about fencing, so they pretty much went over my head this time. But at least I noticed. Let's see, the Dread Pirate Roberts Wesley reveal in the hilltop scene. That's pretty fantastic. Also, just that straight rom-com stuff, of reclaiming love, realizing your love is right here with you. Fezzik as the Dread Pirate Roberts when they're storming the castle. I can remember that scene just as a kid. He's this towering figure and he's on fire. And then at the very end, Wesley's clapback to Humperdinck, who wants to duel him, and he just insults him just ruthlessly before standing up and raising his sword. But I think I got to go with the Cliffs of Insanity duel. What about
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Yeah, for me, I think I mentioned it. It's probably why I was drawn to it as a kid. But that sequence of events of Cliffs of Insanity, and then the fight with Andre the Giant, and then I always loved that Battle of Wits scene. I thought it was just so funny. You mentioned the dialogue from the two characters there, and it's just the punch of when he dies and kills over. I just think it's classic. And it's funny, I did mention if Hallie remembered this film, she remembered him as the teacher in Clueless.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's funny that was like her reference point. But yeah, I always like that battle wit scene. But so as a scene, yeah, definitely that one. But I always just like the punchline of when they come across the six-finger man in the hallway and all his guards go after him and they get, wiped out really quick, and him just turning and just bolting.
Right.
that always made me laugh. It seemed more realistic. And you talked about, I did like enjoying this film, like that whole scene on the cliffs and the sword play that happens there. I mean, you're looking at the two actors, and like, there's a couple of times where you can tell they threw a stunt person in there, but I mean, those guys the camera holds on them too. And
Right.
like, I was impressed by, I mean, they had to learn, I wonder how many weeks of lessons they had to take to get this fencing down. It's
I don't
impressive.
know. And part of me was like, was this sound that they added in post-production, or were these guys really going at it? But as a kid, I can just remember being just so raptured by how amazing that duel was, and all of the footwork and stuff that now it's like, well, that's kind of like the rope when he swings on the
Mhm.
rope and does the flip. It's like, well, that's a little gratuitous. But as a kid, I was like, no, that is the coolest. This dude is just a bad mother. Like, it's awesome.
No better way to intimidate your opponent than by
Right.
swinging on a
Just some
log.
casual gymnastics, really
Yeah,
what's going to seal the deal.
yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, I just, it's funny. I had never thought about it like watching it as a kid, but it's almost like this movie is this romance adventure film kind of mixed with the Marx Brothers movies, which I didn't see till later in life. But I mean, just it's very this. It's got this old school humor, lots of pratfalls, lots of little one-liners and stuff. And so I do kind of, I would like Hallie to watch this again just to see if the humor still strikes the same chord. I mean, it's not a Billy Crystal movie, but obviously Rob Reiner worked with him again and When Harry Met Sally, but it's very much a Billy Crystal type of punchlines and humor and that sort of
Yes.
thing. So I do kind of wonder how that holds up, to newer generations.
Movie musings.
What is your favorite fairy tale, or what was your favorite childhood story? Was there something you always came back to?
I don't recall fairy tales being all that prominent in my childhood. I remember things more like Berenstain Bear books or Lyle Lyle Crocodile rather than fairy tale or fantasy. And so honestly, Princess Bride might be, kind of the signature fairy tale story of my childhood. I mean, we watched all the Disney movies, and so we had, the Snow White and Sleeping Beauty and things like that, but none of the classics. And I think this is probably closer to those classics. And so this one probably is the fairy tale from my childhood that stands out the most.
Yeah, like you, probably a lot of what my memory of fairy tales was probably based on what like Disney produced to us. But there's always that moment in life where you actually go to the original like source material of a fairy tale and you're like, oh, this is dark.
Yeah.
And especially this movie kind of leans into that a little bit, in which we talked about. But I was thinking about that. But a childhood book that I just grew up loving is I'm gonna make sure I get the name right here, but Sideways Stories from Wayside School.
Yeah.
Did you ever read those books?
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
But I was thinking about that, and I was like, it's not a classic fairy tale in that sense, but it definitely plays on these kind of just outlandish scenarios and stuff. So that was a book I always enjoyed. So this movie also, it made me think about just sick days in general, but do you ever remember being sick as a kid, or what that day was like when you had to stay home?
Yeah. I mean, this is an iconic sick day movie, like right up there with Ferris Bueller, and there's not a single sick day in my life that resembled either of these movies, Ferris Bueller or Princess Bride, in terms of the treatment that I got at home. No, I can remember sick days. One, I had to be really sick in order to stay home. Like, I can just remember lots of like, nope, you're going to school. But sick days mostly were like saltine crackers, 7-Up, Price is Right. Depending on when in the year it was, there might be some Cubs baseball on WGN.
Yep.
And just a lot of laying low. But then like I can also remember on those days that when I grew up we were in a cul-de-sac, and there were just a ton of families with kids. And so when school was over and hearing everybody playing outside and running around, it was like all of a sudden I got real better real fast because I wanted to go outside and play. And mom just being like, nope, you're sick. You have to stay inside. So yeah, my sick days were pretty basic. What about you? What was your experience like?
Yeah, I don't remember. Very, very similar to you. I think there was almost a sense of like, you kind of had to shut things down if you really were like gonna stay home, so, but always kind of like, honestly, a movie like The Princess Bride is probably something I would have popped in and like watched or something like that. But it's so different. Like recently, I don't know if this is becoming the old man podcast, but like saying, well, if
Maybe we
kids,
should start one, Nathan.
yeah, no, but like, once I'm bringing up Hallie a lot in this, but like back in the fall, it was one of those, she felt real bad the night before, but she had a fever, but she felt fine the next day, but she needed to stay home or whatever. And she still was, she was herself, but, still kind of bound to a couch or whatever. And so different now because school and education is so technology based now that she was still logging in, and like, she's just someone who doesn't like to get behind and stuff like that. And she did her schoolwork for the day, just like on the typical sick day. Now, I'm sure there's lots of kids who would be like, oh yeah, I'm not turning that computer on or whatever. Sure. But it is a lot different because it's like it's almost kind of like if you have a snow day now or that type of thing. Like now there's such remote type of things that like, I mean, even if I'm feeling bad and I feel like I have to be home, I feel like I'll be looking at my phone, looking at work emails and stuff like that. I just don't think you can disconnect both as a child or as an adult like you used to.
Oh,
For
I
sure.
think that's absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Yeah, but yeah. Yeah, so saltine crackers for sure, folks. And for some reason, I always associated we never kept 7-Up or Sprite in the house. That wasn't even like a soft drink I necessarily loved. But whenever I was sick, for whatever reason, that Sprite was the thing to get. I don't know why, and I think even when my kids get sick now, that maybe it just hits a spot or something in your throat or something. I don't know why.
It's so funny because I love Sprite, but whenever like I taste 7-Up and they taste, it's just like, nope, this is the one you drink when you're sick, and Sprite's the one that you drink like when you go to the movies.
That's funny. So we talked about some of the intense scenes and creatures from this film. Outside of this film, is there a movie scene or a character that kind of haunted you as a child?
Gosh, I don't know the name of the character, but there was the prince. I think it was Princess and the Frog Muppet adaptation,
Okay.
and there was this giant brown monster who had like a flappy mouth, and he was holding. I don't even remember the plot, Nathan, totally, but I remembered that the prince as the frog was bouncing around, his kind of dungeon lair, and he was trying to smash him with a giant bat. And that guy, I'm gonna have to look up his name, but that guy always haunted me as a kid.
Hey, later, if you could you like do a Google search for that and then send it to me, and then it'd be a kind of a fun image to add on our website page.
Yes, absolutely. Let me see. Like Sweetums was his name.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I remember Sweetums.
Yeah, no, Sweetums was just straight up nightmare fuel for me as a kid.
Yeah, I was talking the other day with some friends about just even though I wasn't necessarily into horror movies as a kid at all, but I just remember the horror section of a VHS store and how vivid those covers were. And even though I've never seen Ghoulies or Critters, those VHS covers just totally stick out like in my brain. And there was something about I watched Raiders of the Lost Ark a lot as a child, and that face melting scene at the end, that was something that always kind of like both intrigued me, but kind of like it scared me as well.
Yeah, that one definitely. I think the first couple times, really all the indie movies, like there's Temple of Doom, which I really don't like much at all, but the melting heart stuff, like all of those movies had things that as a kid, kind of stuck with me, where it also had that feeling like, I can't believe I'm allowed to watch this. And looking back now, I'd be like, I definitely wouldn't let my kids watch some of these scenes. But no, mine was much more in this is definitely not real, but it's still terrifying realm of the Muppets.
Jim Henson was a dark fellow.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So now it's time to see how this how this will end up ranking with all the other rom-com films. So the first category is romantic chemistry. So one heart being the lowest, 5 hearts being like the best. Whitney told me the heart thing was cheesy, but I like it. I'm going with
I
it.
like it.
So
I think you should stick with it.
so anyway, so the romantic chemistry between Wesley and Princess Buttercup. What do you give that?
So I gave this one. I wasn't quite sure how these work. Like if each category I had to assign a number, or if I could do each category on a scale. So I did both, but I gave romantic chemistry a 4. The farm scene at the beginning I thought was just straight fire. Like, dang, these are one incredibly handsome, beautiful people in an idyllic setting, but there really was kind of this sense of like, nope, they have some real chemistry here. The scene where Wesley lifts the pitcher off the hook and hands it to her, I thought was just incredible. Some of the dialogue that was written for them, I think, really just helps with that. And then again, the "as you wish" just feels really true. And so I gave romantic chemistry a 4. 4 hearts.
Okay, so this is where we disagree a little bit. So I think this is a very romantic movie. As far as the chemistry between the different characters and the actors here, I give it 2
Okay.
because and not that I don't like Robin Wright, but like this is where I blame the filmmakers. I don't think they give her anything to do. Like I think
Fair.
you could easily see anybody in this role. I mean, we don't really know much about her at all. I think Wesley gets all the glory, so to speak, all the lines, all that, and so it doesn't take away from the romantic nature of this film. But as far as them together, it's like
I think that's fair. Like I think if you stripped away the dialogue, or if the dialogue wasn't as good, I think you're right. It probably doesn't hold up as well. But I think their lines are so well written
mhm.
um, that it does make it believable to me that they are two people in love.
Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely get that, but that was something, I'm like, eh. But so okay, another component, the second category, and and once again, this movie, some of these categories, it's going to be a little different, I think, compared to the other films on the list. But I always think the best friend or the supporting character element of a romantic comedy always stands out. So I kind of worried about that category when I started this movie, but then I was like, oh my gosh, like Inigo and Fezzik, I mean,
Yeah.
they're amazing best friends. I mean, they're really best friends to a point where they don't really even need to be. But anyway, I'm cutting you off a little bit, but I had to give 5 stars to the best friend element here.
No, I'm right there with you. I think um, one, Wesley never gets reunited with Princess Buttercup without these two guys. And so, in a lot of traditional rom-coms, the best friend is the naysayer, or like, this isn't
Mhm.
going to work out or whatever. And these guys are just like, no, we're going to go on a quest. And granted, part of it is selfish on Inyo's part. And, Fezzik doesn't really have anything else going on. So it's just kind of like whatever. But, I don't think the movie plays without those two guys as in that best friend spot. So I'm with you. 5 hearts for Fezzik and Inyo.
Yeah, and Wendy's gonna make fun of me now because I said 5 stars, I think, instead of 5 hearts. So anyway, okay. So I think another element of a good romantic comedy is the soundtrack. So this is another one where it's definitely more score dominated than maybe some of the other films that will be on this list. And so, but it's been fun because I'm actually going back and listening to the soundtrack. So kind of a little background, Mark Knopfler, he's the one who composed this, and he's famous for being in the band Dire Straits. And so I didn't know if you knew that or not, but
Nope.
yeah, but they have the hits Money for Nothing, and oh, there's another one that's real popular. Dun, 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 Walk of Life, I think it's called, or something like. But anyway, so kind of one of those like rock star turned like composer, which is a trend you see in film sometimes.
Yeah.
So, but also with this, there's like a lot of not just romantic comedies, but a lot of films have the like actual song with vocals, but especially in 80s movie,
Right.
the song that lines the credits of this movie is Storybook Love, and it was actually nominated for best original song. But I
Really?
don't know, how do you feel about this soundtrack?
I feel like this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I only give it one heart. There was nothing that memorable about the score for me, except for like occasional trumpeting. Um, and and so at the end, like it was familiar because I've seen it so many times, and it's nostalgic because of this just being with my childhood. But there wasn't much that the score or soundtrack did for me in the actual movie. So I don't know. Is that a hot take, or how many hearts did you give this?
Well, listening to it again, I ended up on two hearts.
Okay.
It was even as because there are certain soundtracks that are just original scores I could listen to all the time in the background. This isn't one of them. There's some certain like melodies that you associate with the movie, especially at the beginning in the scene with the farmhand and them and Buttercup together, like as you mentioned. There's some of those elements. Even Storybook Love, the song itself, like it's nostalgic in the sense of like, oh yeah, this was like a song from an 80s movie, but
Right.
like as actual like, oh, I would want to play that, like it's not very high for me. So yeah, a lot of the soundtrack is like it's like there's a scene where Fezzik is, I think it's Fezzik. No, it's Inigo trying to knock the door down, and like as he's hitting the door, like the soundtrack kind of goes along with the actions of the
Right.
movie, and it's like you said, it's kind of cheesy. So yeah, not too, yeah, we're lined up there.
Okay,
So
good.
another thing, this was the next category. When I was thinking, I was like, oh, I don't know how this plays into this film. I had a chase scene or a declaration of love, but then I laughed when this movie ended because I was like, this whole movie is a chase scene, and this whole movie is a declaration of love. So I had to give it 5 hearts. I don't know about you.
Okay. Well, I agree with you on that point, but I was trying to think of what specific scene in the movie would I count as the declaration of love.
Yeah.
And I think I landed on the hilltop scene when Wesley is kind of just berating her for getting engaged to the prince. And then, she pushes him down the hill and he yells out, "As you wish." And she realizes very suddenly, which, like, would you get it that quickly? That it's her long lost lover. And then she flings herself, as, lovers do, down the hill after him. And so I gave that a 2
Okay.
because I just, as the dialogue is so sharp and so good in so many other places of the movie. In this one, it just felt very weird, and maybe this further supports your chemistry argument, but like it's not entirely clear why Wesley's being such a jerk, other than he's mad that after 5 years, when he was assumed dead, that she got on with her life.
He
And
almost strikes her too.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like it just that part didn't age well. And then yeah, she pushes him down the hill. He reveals himself to be Wesley, and then she's like, "Cool, rather than sliding down the hill or walking down, I'm just going to violently fling myself to the bottom." And then they're at the bottom of the ravine, and let's make out, but there's no bumps, no bruises, no broken bones. And so for what's supposed to be the big reveal, I just couldn't really get with it. And so I give it 2 hearts.
Okay.
But
No.
if I'm taking the long view like you, I got to go with 5.
And so the last category, which I think always makes up not just a good movie, but especially romantic comedy, rewatchability. What do you give it?
Yeah, this one was easy. It's a 5.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
mean, first of all, as we've talked about, it's just so funny and so quippy. that you can come back to it time and time again, and different stuff is going to pop out, which I think is a hallmark of a rewatchable movie. It's also pretty self-aware, which I really love. And I think it allows the movie to just breathe differently and makes it fun. And then I didn't remember this at all. In my head, this movie was much, much longer than what it really was. But it's just 99 minutes.
Yeah, it's a tight film.
They don't make too many movies like this anymore. So to be able to sit down and get in and out in less than 2 hours for kind of a sweeping fantasy story is pretty incredible. So yeah, that's why I gave it a 5. What about you?
Yeah, for sure. 5 hearts, easy. So, and just almost watching it this time, just as an older adult, kind of reiterated it. Like, oh yeah, this movie really can span, the generations, like for sure. And so, well, that's great. I'll gather those up on our podcast episode page on the website. I'm putting kind of the ratings. I'll cobble mine together, and I'm going to cobble our guests together to kind of see where it falls. So it'll be interesting to see. I think we can both agree that Princess Bride is a great movie, just as a movie itself. Is
100%.
Is it a great romantic comedy? We'll kind of see where it ends up falling. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think as you've talked about, as we've kind of talked about, this movie could fall into a lot of different categories, whereas some of the other movies on the Ringer's top 50 list can only fall in rom-com. I think Princess Bride could fall in a lot of different groups. So it'll be interesting to see what others think of it and how it stacks up.
Yeah, you can almost see the Office arguments, like debating, its place on this list.
I mean, technically, could you say this is a Christmas movie? Because in the opening scene, there's Christmas lights on the house across the street, and Grandpa comes in with a wrapped present. So, I mean, if the Christmas movie people want to really steal this one, I think the case could be made.
I think we have enough Christmas movies. I don't want to lump this into into that.
Recommendations.
Okay, so for 2023, we have a new segment, just recommendations. What's one thing that you would recommend that you think people should check out in the entertainment world?
Sure. I, like many others, am a big fan of Taylor Sheridan's work, and have immersed myself in the extended Yellowstone universe. And so I've been watching 1923.
Oh, okay.
I've really been enjoying it. Much more than 1883, and at times more than Yellowstone itself. And so it too has a great cast in it: Harrison Ford, Helen Mirren, a lot of that guys. But I would recommend that, particularly for the way that it treats that period of time, I think really well. It also it is pretty hard to watch at times because of the way that they depict the Catholic Church and their treatment of Native people, especially girls, which is not always easy to watch, but our history isn't always easy to be reminded of. And so I think it's really good. And it too has a romantic thread that runs through part of the story. And I think those scenes in particular are where the show really shines.
Okay, awesome. No, good. Yeah, we have watched and still watching Yellowstone, but we haven't dived into the other offshoots. I think Yellowstone is in particularly a little ridiculous, but that's part of the reason that we enjoy it. But we haven't. We just haven't. It almost seems a little too much to kind of dive into those other worlds, despite the immense talent that they've gathered for those offshoots. So
yeah, I think with Yellowstone, it's kind of like season 1. Here's a bad guy who wants to take the ranch. Season 2. Here's a couple more bad guys who want to take the ranch, and so it's just. I feel like it's very well worn. And so one of the things I do appreciate about these prequels is that there's a little bit more adventure and there's a little bit more room for depth of character.
Yeah.
1883 was good. I was surprised by how good Tim McGraw and Faith Hill's performances were, but it's also like crazy bleak. 1923 is still fairly bleak, but it does. I think those elements of romance give it hope, which is why I like it more than probably the other things in the extended Yellowstone universe.
Yeah, I, I'm a little tired of the number titles. They're gonna start. They need to at least have it like 1923 colon something like,
Sure.
because not just with the Yellowstone universe, but with other films that are out there. Even like 1917 from not to we're all gonna lose track of these at some point. But but yeah. My quick recommendation is actually the memoir by Matthew Perry, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. And so I actually listened to this, checked it out through the library, which I almost like. I mean, always think reading a book is great, but I think it's enhanced by the audiobook because Matthew Perry reads it himself,
Oh,
so
cool.
yeah. And man, I mean, it's intense. It's revealing. I found it a pretty interesting, although maybe not totally surprising, but he lays it all out there for sure. And it's almost an interesting memoir with he not that he's trying to make an argument that he is a good guy, but he definitely doesn't shy away from his faults and misgivings and stuff. And so it's just a very candid look, but it's definitely once you get through it, you definitely want to talk about it with other people. So I recommend checking that out. When it released, it was all over. I mean, he was on every talk show that was out there and stuff. So you're a little bit kind of like, is this book like actually good, or is this just really driven by PR? And it's a book that's pretty fascinating, especially if you've been a fan of his acting work and Friends in particular. So anyway, I recommend that. So well, I appreciate you once again taking the time to come on and watch the movie and talk about this movie again. So it's a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun to revisit movies you love, and so thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that and for having me on.
Yeah, no, of course. And for next week, we're actually almost kind of unexpectedly, we're going to take a little break from the list because I always like to be in conversation when it comes to certain movies. And this one movie had just been popping up a lot with my friends talking about it, and I checked it out as well. And it's just one of those films that is almost better just because of the conversation it elicits. But I'm talking about this film that came out last fall, The Menu. Have you seen the movie?
I just watched it last week. Yes.
Oh, okay. So great. Yeah. So you'll be anticipating the podcast, but
absolutely.
Wouldn't you agree it's a good one to talk about?
I think so. Especially, I went in blind, and so I assumed it was going to be one kind of movie, and when it didn't turn out to be that way and became this different kind of movie, it was really thrilling. But as someone who loves like Chef's Table, I also felt a little bit called out by this movie. So no, I think it's a great movie to have lots of different kinds of conversations. So I'll be looking forward to that episode.
Yeah, no, it'll be a fun one to talk about. So yeah, I just want to thank everyone for listening, and remember that I included in the show notes. So if you're listening to your podcast, there's always a description. Click on the show notes, and there's a link where you can support the podcast. This podcast has been a blast to do, but it helps to have some financial support to keep things running. So if you're inclined to do so, click on the link and give. We would really appreciate it. Michael, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was great.
Sure thing. Have a great weekend.
Okay, you too. Bye, man.
Bye.